Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to be going over a few common questions when it comes to looking for a job in UX design and being able to kind of sift through those job descriptions and figure out if this is the right position for you. So let's get started. In-house teams typically focus on one core product. You might find that even with that one product, it could be divided into separate feature teams. So for example, if you think about Facebook, there might be a separate team for Messenger, a separate team for Timeline, and perhaps a separate team for digital advertising and display ads. You're generally answering to internal stakeholders. You might also be answering to shareholders, depending on the status of whether it's a publicly traded company or if there are any investors. And you might also be answering to clients if it's like a B2B business where your company is essentially providing a service or a product to other businesses. Typically, the business model for agencies is that they have multiple clients, and those clients can span across different industries. So for example, they might have one dedicated to education, one for finance, one for healthcare. Sometimes you might end up working on multiple clients in an agency. So it's a good chance for you to kind of get exposed to these different sort of industries and figure out which one really interests you, so that in the future, if you do plan on working for an internal team, in-house team, you might have a better idea of what it is that you particularly liked working on, what sort of projects you enjoy taking on. I will say that having worked in agencies for quite a while, one of the downsides is that all the different clients feel like their projects are the priority, and as a result you have a lot of people breathing down your neck wanting to get their deadlines met. There are definitely some clients that keep the lights on, so to speak, and you really have to make sure that you don't let things fall underneath or between the cracks for those. For startups and large corporations, from a UX perspective, the primary difference is usually the level of maturity of their UX teams. With startups, you might find that you're generally wearing many different hats and kind of taking on different roles such as product manager, UI designer, UX researcher. So you get to really run the gamut of what UX entails. The good thing is that you really get to experience UX from a more generalist perspective. So in this way, think of it as kind of like sampling the different disciplines and figuring out which one is right for you. So for example, you might find that you really enjoy research, or you really enjoy designing interfaces, or you might notice that you have a knack for product management. So in that regards, it can kind of help you focus more in your next position. The good thing is, because you're kind of testing out so many different disciplines within UX, you could really think of it as like a UX generalist role, where you're doing everything, but then you also get to sample and see which appeals to you the most. In your next job, for example, if you found that you really enjoyed research, you might want to go and apply directly for a UX researcher role instead. The downside is that because startup teams tend to be smaller to begin with, you might find that you're actually the only UX designer there. So if it's a little understaffed, you might feel like you're not quite getting the support that you need. Another thing is you might actually need to educate other members of your company, other team members as well, across different departments, what exactly UX is. A lot of companies are looking for UX designers, and they might have UX postings in job boards, but then when you read the description, it kind of looks like they're looking for some magical unicorn that's able to do everything, or they might think well, maybe UX just means making my site look pretty, and they might confuse it with visual design. So it's important that you're able to communicate, hey, UX also involves doing a bunch of research and testing. That's where the U in UX comes from, user experience. You need to actually talk to users. The good thing about startups is that you don't really need to go through layers and layers of red tape if it's more bureaucratic. You might be able to start developing your own design and research process within the company if they haven't already established one, which probably less likely if the UX team level of maturity is not that far along. As we all know, for startups, it could be really fun and exciting as you're watching this small company kind of grow into something bigger, especially if you really believe in its leaders or its mission, its vision. But, it's very unstable or insecure in the beginning if you're still trying to get funding to sustain the company for X number of years. So that's something to keep in mind as well if you're looking through job postings. Is that something that's going to keep you up at night? In a large corporation, the UX teams tend to be more mature, and as a result, they probably already have a lot of design processes in place. So they might work with companies to help them with testing, for example. There are probably going to be teams that are more siloed and focus on one particular area of UX. So for example, research or visual design. So if you want to do everything, you might not have as much of an opportunity to do that. You might be the person who's like drafting the wireframes and then passing it off to someone to really finesse and make it pixel perfect. So if you want to be able to do all of that, you might want to seek out a more generalist role. It's also great for more junior designers. There's a higher chance that you might be working under someone who has been doing UX for many, many years. And as a result, because you have more senior UX designers on the team, you could probably seek more support and perhaps even a mentor who's willing to help you grow in your career. The pay and benefits in a large corporation are generally better. You always hear stories about how amazing the Google office spaces are. You get perks like, I think, free yoga classes or something, free gym memberships, or free snacks in the office. So if those are things that you care about as well, definitely take that into consideration when deciding between working at a startup or a large corporation. So do you need to know graphic design before going into UX? I would say that it's definitely helpful, especially if you have more UI or user interface heavy projects. But if you're doing more of a research position, then I would say that it might not play as big of a role in it, but obviously still helpful to learn. It could probably help you put together some beautiful mock-ups, at least in your case studies, in your portfolio. You're probably already quite familiar with a lot of design patterns in digital interfaces because if you're regularly interacting with apps on your phone or visiting websites, you probably already know this is generally how a form looks, or this is how a button looks. This is how it's like to check out in an e-commerce website, or this is how I scroll through my social media feed. And those types of experiences you can definitely draw from when you start beginning to think about how to design for something. Do you need to learn how to code to become a good UX designer? Just like with graphic design, I would say that it's helpful, but it's not mandatory. And if you're seeing a job description that is asking for kind of like a hybrid engineer and UX designer role, maybe be a little more wary of that. They might be looking for something that we call like a unicorn, where essentially you're like doing 2 jobs for the price of one. Unless, engineering is something that you're really good at, if programming is something you have a lot of experience in the past, it's probably going to end up eating more of your time on a day-to-day basis if you're expected to do both roles. But even if you don't have a programming background, it's still important to communicate with your engineers and be able to let them know what your expected end state is based on your design. So definitely annotate your designs and make sure you have highlighted all the tech specs, like this is the functionality that I want in the end. You don't have to get into nitty-gritty like this is how I expect it to be built in the back end or anything like that. The engineers will architect a solution, but from a UX perspective, you still need to communicate that I wanted to perform this way because this is how I tested with users and they responded positively to this specific sort of interaction. At the very least, I would say picking up some basic HTML and CSS doesn't hurt. It could at least help you articulate your designs with front-end engineers a bit better. Is it actually tough to look for a job in UX design right now? I would say it's a really, really hot field. A lot of companies are having these UX job postings. You might sometimes see it listed as product designer, sometimes even as UI designer when they might also be looking for a UX designer. I would say definitely read the job descriptions very carefully. Again, a lot of companies, they might only be looking for a UX designer because they think it's trendy, that it might be something that they need, but they're not too sure what a UX designer does. Because of the pandemic, a lot of companies are moving online, so of course digital projects are becoming more and more important. So as a result, you might also find that a lot of e-commerce websites are seeking UX designers as well. If you are looking to enroll in a bootcamp, or you might have recently enrolled in a bootcamp, you're going to realize that a lot of students are graduating these days and they're all kind of vying for those same junior designer positions. So the competition's pretty fierce. Speaking of, are people actually looking for junior designers? I'll be honest that after I graduated from bootcamp, it was actually pretty tough to find junior designer roles. I feel like because it was still kind of towards the beginning-ish of the pandemic, a lot of people were trying to, or a lot of companies were trying to mitigate risk. There were so many layoffs, and companies are trying to cut costs and things like that. So they might want to mitigate their risk by hiring more mid or senior level designers with a proven track record. The good news is these days I've been seeing a lot of recent grads from bootcamp actually getting junior designer roles. So it looks like companies are starting to hire for them again, which is great because it means they're willing to invest in fresh talent and kind of help them grow in the company. Even if you're a recent bootcamp grad, I would say still apply for those mid or senior level positions. Sometimes companies post that specific title to perhaps intimidate or scare off more junior level applicants who might not be as confident in their own abilities. But if you're someone who might be brand new to UX design, but you might have 10 years working in corporate America, that experience is really helpful and really invaluable because being able to talk to clients, being able to manage business objective expectations is something that can't necessarily be taught just with a 3-month boot camp. So you really have a leg up above students who might have just recently graduated from college, for example. It's really common to have that imposter syndrome if you're brand new to UX. You might think, am I really a designer? I don't really have a design background. Trust me, I've been there even with a design background. Going into any field brand new, you're gonna feel like, do I really belong here? But trust in your abilities. If you have had happy clients in the past, think about their testimonials as well. Someone believed in you, so believe in yourself as well. Besides, you can't get experience if you don't try, right? I found that with smaller companies and startups, they tend to have more senior sounding titles anyway. So if the job description says they're looking for someone who's mid to senior level, it might be different from, say, if Google or Facebook were to look for someone who's mid to senior level. They might be a lot more strict about the number of years of experience you had to have in UX. Whereas with startups, it might be a little more lenient. They say that they're looking for someone who's mid-level or senior level, but it's like, if you have the chops for it, if you have a great portfolio, they might still be like, okay, well, it looks like this person can do the work, so it doesn't really matter if, this is the title that we intend to give them. Job hunting can be a very long and arduous process. You might actually find that you have a lot of downtime between sending out your cover letters and resumes or job applications. It typically takes between 2 weeks to even a month, sometimes even many months, depending on which company you're applying for, before they actually get back to you. I would say use this time wisely. Take on freelance or pro bono projects even if you have the time. They could be just small projects, maybe helping someone out with a tiny website, or improving their app a little, or conducting a bit of research for a friend. I would say that if you're continually honing your skills and getting more real world experience, you can even use these anecdotes as interview talking points later on. So if an interviewer asks you, tell me about a time when a client challenged a design decision that you had, you can have that real world example to use. There's always something that you can be working on to grow as a UX designer. Even if it's not taking on these smaller projects, you can be learning a new program. Maybe you want to beef up your prototypes. You could pick up an animation tool. You can also figure out how to code. Even when you become a UX designer, it's never going to be like, all right, I got this. I am completely a UX master now. I understand everything about this field. You're always going to be reading up on new research, taking a look at current UX trends, or even picking up new programs. So hopefully that can help you figure out what type of job you might be looking for within UX, and even what type of red flags to look out for. They say that the first job is the hardest to get, and then it gets a little easier after. And that's totally understandable because, again, companies want to reduce risk and hire someone that has previous experience. But again, obviously, everyone's got to start somewhere. If you like that video, remember to hit like and subscribe. I plan on including more content about freelance versus salary roles, so check back for more videos like that. Thank you.